So I'm the new president, for those of you that haven't met me, Margaret Ucolano at CEA. So this is my first webinar with you all, and it's great to meet you. I look forward to meeting everybody in person, hopefully at our annual summit in October. That save the date will be going out this week, and you'll be able to get more information on that. But I'm really excited to introduce our two speakers today. As you all know, most of us are pretty excited. We see an onslaught of executive orders coming out of Trump administration in their first days of office. And we invited Marty Irby and Congressman Mooney to join our call today to really talk to you as business owners. What do those executive orders mean, and really what's going to take place on the Hill? So hopefully this will be really informative and as exciting to you all as it is to us. And with that, just a real brief introduction. Congressman Mooney, for those of you that don't know, super nice Christian evangelical. He's been representing us on the Hill for over 10 years, from 2015 to 2025. That is a feat in itself to get reelected to Congress as many times as he has. He's had some strong ties with the Freedom Caucus. I'll let him talk about that. But he's been an overall champion for our issues and for Christian businesses across the nation. And he has joined Marty Irby, who is the president of Capital South. It's a lobbying house in DC on the Hill. There also are soon-to-be lobbyists representing Christian Employers Alliance on the Hill as we finalize our legislative agenda, which we are hoping to have done in the next 2 weeks. And so we're going to have a powerful team on the Hill to represent our business concerns. And I just have to say, Marty, because he won't say it about himself, I've known him a long time, but there are thousands and thousands of registered lobbyists on the Hill in DC, and he has been rated one of the top 10 lobbyists for 6 or 7 years, on and off or straight. I can't remember. I can't keep up with it, but of our values. And I can just say, working with him on the Hill, he's got incredible relationships really is what I should say, on both sides. And he's just really, really good at what he does. And so this is our first opportunity to be able to introduce you both, as they will be representing us in the near future on the Hill. So with that, Marty and Congressman, thank you so much. And I'll let you guys decide who starts and dig in.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, you want to go first, or you want me to?
I'll defer to you.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having us here today. Margaret is so kind with their comments. There are about 20,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and it's the top 1%, so the top 200. She always moves me up the ladder a little bit, but I appreciate that. It's really a great opportunity to be here. I've lived in Washington, D.C. about 12 years. And a lot of people, when we talk about this, the first question they have is, well, what is a lobbyist? So I always say no kid in the history of the world ever said, I want to be a lobbyist when I grow up. It just sort of happens to you from either working in Congress, working on policy, being a former member of Congress, working in various administrations or things like that. And the word lobbyist actually comes from a time back in the late 1800s when Ulysses S. Grant was president in the Willard Hotel where he was staying. And all of these folks would come into the lobby and they would talk to him and they would advocate for things, for policies within the government and so on and so forth. So that is actually where the term lobbyist came from, was the Willard Hotel lobby during the Grant administration. A little history for you there. And we work every day on Capitol Hill, primarily on health care, agriculture, and other issues of that nature. I tell people most of our clients are actually nonprofits, not really by design, but I don't really lobby for things. And I think the congressman feels the same way in his work in Congress that we don't believe in. So a lot of times that ends up being nonprofits, like we worked with Margaret, with Moms for America, Freedom Works. We have an autism facility that we work with in Alabama. We've got farmers from around the country, about 7,000 farmers, and several others that we work with. So I think it's really important with our value system that we're aligned with the greater cause and the greater purpose. And I know for what you all are looking for, that's to help expand your businesses, to cut federal red tape, to help your businesses grow and things like that. So I know the congressman will give us a kind of an overview of the first days of the Trump administration. I think the president signed 200 executive orders or so the very first evening. He had them sitting there on the desk, ready, waiting, and got them out the door. This is not like the first Trump administration. I think they came in there with some great aspirations. They did run into the deep state, and they did run into a lot of problems. This is a whole different ballgame because they had 4 years to plan while Joe Biden was in office, and they hit the ground running. And I think we're going to see probably, if we haven't already seen more from this president than any other president just in the first few days, we definitely will in the coming months and years ahead. And I think we've got a great opportunity to really turn the country around, to really help the American people who are out there struggling to put food on the table due to the cost of inflation and all of the different things that have been such terrible factors over the past 4 or 5 years while Joe Biden was in office, and that administration nearly tanked the country. I know with the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, that Elon Musk is heading up with some help from Vivek Ramaswamy. They have really worked to try to cut spending, identify things in that area, and have already identified billions of dollars we could cut. There's so much corruption. There's so much waste that's out there, and it's your tax dollars at the end of the day, and those tax dollars are being used against you and your businesses. So we're all out here for the light and the right cause to further the Lord's will. And I'll turn it over to the congressman. I'll come back to you after he talk about some of the agriculture issues in Farm Bill. Congressman.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Marty. I couldn't agree more. The term lobbyist is not a bad word. Good guys have lobbyists. The National Rifle Association, NRA, has a lobbyist to defend our Second Amendment rights. There are lobbyists for manufacturers who just make products we need. There are lobbyists that lobby for causes we believe in. And there are also lobbyists that lobby for causes I don't believe in, like NARAL and things like that. So we, it's a respectable line of work. And, to fill out my bio a little bit, I've been in Congress for the last 10 years. Of course, I just left on January 3rd. Prior to that, I did spend 12 years in the state Senate. And, I guess my role has been elected official, first elected 26 years ago to the state Senate. The lobbyists inform us. I sit there in committee and I have meetings in my office, and the lobbyists come in. They're experts on the issue topic that I have to vote on. And I really valued a half an hour meeting with a lobbyist and the association, like your association, to come in and say, hey, this is our view on it. That was very informative and very valuable. And I kind of viewed it, my role to find groups like this, Christian Employers Association, and other groups that I agree with already anyhow, and simply how do we work together to be effective for the things that you and I both believe in. Christian values, free markets, less government regulation, family values, patriotism. These are things we already believe in. The question is, how do we win? How do we be effective while the forces on the other side who don't believe in that, they frankly believe in Marxism and atheism, and they want to have boys play girls in sports, which is just something so crazy. No one was even talking about that like 5 years ago, but somehow that became a topic. I mean, that should tell you how far off some in our country are. Fortunately, they're the minority. They're the vast minority. As you saw in the last election, never been prouder to be an American. The country turned more towards traditional values, and it's been a great thing. So, the first 100 days been very interesting to me. I almost feel like I am watching the movie over again that I was part of in 2017. In 2017, remember, Trump won the election. Republicans, that I was part of, the House of Representatives, Paul Ryan was Speaker, and we had a Republican Senate, 52 Republican senators. So it's really the same political setup today as 2017, 7 years ago. The difference, as Marty mentioned, is true. Trump is a veteran now. He had served president for 4 years. He saw what worked and what didn't work. He got some bad advice, in my view, his first couple of years. And I'll just give you one example. The first spending bill we passed, Trump's first year in office, did not build the wall. Trump's entire campaign in 2016 was build the wall, secure the border. We didn't build it in our first, it wasn't in the spending bill. We fought for it. We tried to put it in there. Reference to Freedom Caucus, a lot of us in the Freedom Caucus, Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan, two of my very good friends, went to Trump and said, Mr. President, if you don't insist on the wall in this first spending bill, you're never going to get it. Don't listen to the other people that are telling you otherwise, other Republicans. We got to put it in there. Well, it wasn't in there, and Trump signed the bill, and we never built the wall. Now, he did it by executive order, and you're seeing a lot of executive orders now. Trump is not double down, not triple down. He's 10 times down on executive orders. And it's great. We agree with all these executive orders. It's fantastic. But these are just executive orders. An executive order that's done today can be repealed and reversed as soon as there's a different president in 4 years, if there is, one that doesn't agree with it. And we saw that. Joe Biden last year was literally tearing down the wall. He was literally, by executive order, removing the wall that Trump put by an emergency executive order. So I'm of the view that Congress still matters a lot in this process. We need to put things into law. not just executive orders. We need to support the executive orders, of course. That gives us immediate relief. I was on financial services for my last 8 years in Congress, and I saw how basically the socialist view that government should essentially run everything and regulate everything and know everything about your investors and so much paperwork you really can't start a company anymore. I mean, I saw this. They're basically socialists on the left versus free market conservatives who want to deregulate. An example of that was cryptocurrency. When I first got on financial services, again in that would have been 2017, Zeb Hensling was chairman. It's almost like we got to remember history, recent history, because we forget how much happened then. But Zeb Hensling of Texas was chairman. He's a free market conservative. He didn't think government needed to interfere in any way with cryptocurrency type of stuff, and he just didn't even have hearings on it, no bills related to it. He just let the free market develop. And cryptocurrencies developed a lot during that time, and it flourished. When Maxine Waters became chairman, they were really adamant about finding a way to have the government interfere and basically do permits and regulate cryptocurrencies. And unfortunately, they slipped in something they've wanted for years, beneficial ownership, into one of the bills that was one of these omnibus, big bills. And for the first time in the history of America, there was regulations on cryptocurrency. It doesn't make any sense because they can go overseas and do the same thing, but it's just going to hurt American businesses. So right now, you're going to see a lot of relief on the free markets in general, freedom for people to get involved in cryptocurrencies, and frankly, other things, starting banks and just having regulatory relief. That's all going to happen, but it's being done by executive order. The other thing I remember, there was so much skepticism my first year in office, or the first time Trump was in office in 2017, there was a belief we couldn't accomplish anything because you may recall 3 Republican U.S. senators chose to vote with the 48 Democrats and not repeal Obamacare. And that died by 1 vote. And I was hearing it from, frankly, people like you who had worked hard to get, conservatives elected. And they were very upset. And I was in the House. It was hard enough for us to get a healthcare reform bill passed the House, repealing and replacing Obamacare, a monstrosity that's just another step towards socialized medicine and completely doesn't work. Fortunately, we got some regulatory relief there. But people were very upset. They said, we did everything you wanted to do. You got Trump as president, conservatives in the legislature, and you failed at your number one thing, repealing Obamacare. People were ticked off. Now, we did do tax reform after that, and we got that through, which, that we were able to do that. So that showed we could be successful. But the other thing I want to point out in the financial services area was Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank is another monstrosity of government interference in the free markets as far as investing and banking goes. If you're on this call and you're in that business, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We were attempting to repeal it. I would have repealed the whole thing, but we got a bill through the House that took a lot of work with Jeb Hensling as chairman that repealed most of it. Got it over to the Senate. The Senate wasn't willing to repeal most of it, but they did form a coalition of about a dozen Democrats and the Republicans who voted to repeal about a third of Dodd-Frank, and by over 60 votes, because that could be filibustered. They actually literally went around Sherrod Brown, who was a member of who was the chairman of the Democrat ranking member on committee, who didn't want to repeal any of it, Elizabeth Warren. We actually got it through, and we signed that into law. So I'm just saying this because there's a lot of skepticism about how the process works and what can be done. It can happen. You have to go through the process. You have to get involved. But we can be successful at what we said we would do. I would say, it was mentioned I was in the Freedom Caucus. I'm proud of that. I joined the Freedom Caucus my first year in office, and I remained in the Freedom Caucus my entire 10 years in Congress. Some of my colleagues who joined with me quit. Whatever the reasons are, they quit. They didn't want to deal with it anymore. But I stayed my entire 10 years. Jim Jordan, I consider him one of my mentors as far as political strategy goes and taking on your principles. Jim wrote a book. His book was simply entitled, hopefully some of you heard of it or read it, but his book is simply entitled, Do What You Said You Would Do. Not that complicated. All he's recommending is you run for office, you say you're going to do X, Y, and Z, do it. Cut taxes, deregulate, defend your Christian values, just do it. So when people say, what is Trump going to do, for example? How about this? He's going to do what he said he would do. And when it comes to tariffs, he said he was going to tariff China and other countries, and he is. He threw a 25% tariff on them. So it shouldn't really be that hard to, we could, look, Trump will make a deal too, but we should expect Trump to do the things he said he would do: deport illegal immigrants, cut the taxes. That's coming up. Everyone's talking about that as part of the budget process that's going on now. The House is supposed to vote today, finally, and I think they really are on the budget, the first budget. That's the first step in this whole process of cutting taxes and controlling spending in our country. So we think that's going to happen. But and that's where we can help. Help people do what they said they would do. It's all on the platforms that they ran on. So we just need to, make sure we fight for that. So really that's my opening comments. I think maybe we can turn over some questions and go from here.
Hey, Marty, would you mind just doing a brief overview for the people on this call we've been working on the Farm Bill for the last 3 years. It rears its ugly head every 5 years. Mark Meadows thought he destroyed it a while back and was shocked when he heard that it came back. And Marty, you've been the expert on this. And from a business, farmers are business too, right? They're agribusiness. And 100% of your farmers, 7,000 farmers in your coalition are Christian. And they've really, really struggled for the last 4 years. And could you explain a little bit about the Farm Bill, even if you're not a farmer? When you hear about the regulations imposed on them and what the government's been doing to them, it's something that we should all be very frightened of from as a business owner perspective, because if they can do that to our farmers, they can do that to any of us.
Yes, absolutely. No, we have really worked in the space of more regenerative agriculture, putting more farmers back on the land. Most people don't realize that since the 1970s, we only have about 10% of the total number of farmers that we had back then, and a lot more mouths to feed. And that's because of the consolidation and the companies that are I call them the big four packers. Smithfield, which is wholly owned by the Chinese. Their purchase was financed by the Chinese Communist Party back in 2013. JBS is owned by Brazil. The other two are American companies, Cargill and Tyson, and are publicly traded. But we've really worked hard to change policies in this space that really help the farmers instead of big corporations. And I have to say, of all the members of Congress I've worked with, there's just a handful that have what I would call a perfect score on our issues. Congressman Mooney was actually our legislator of the year, which is kind of how we got to be friends a couple of years ago last year. Congresswoman Nancy Mace is one, Senator Rand Paul, Senator Mike Lee. Those are the top folks in Congress that work on these issues. And there are a lot of folks that are out there right now that are misguided, misled, or just plain don't have the staff really educating them the way they should on issues. There's a piece of legislation that's led by Ashley Hinson from Iowa and Roger Marshall from Kansas called the EATS Act that would basically federalize agriculture and nullify about 1,000 state agriculture laws across the country. They're trying to specifically get at some of the laws in California, but the legislation actually takes a sledgehammer to an ant, if you will. So we've been fighting hard against that with Margaret and various organizations she worked in previously. Congressman Mooney worked with us as well in the prior Congress on these issues to fight against this EATS Act. Anna Paulina Luna is now really the leader in Congress against that effort. Many of you probably have heard of her from Florida. She's a superstar in Congress, terrific to work with. And so we're basically seeing policies that are being pushed by Smithfield, again, owned by the Chinese, that would put American family farmers out of business because they want to be able to go in and buy up all of our farmland and raise food for the Chinese. They've already destroyed much of their own land in China, and they're trying to bring that here. They're not trying to take over food production in the way the American people are fed. They're trying to take over food production so they can take the food to China and we won't have food on our tables. And that's a really scary thought because food safety and security is a huge issue today. It's a national security issue. Even General Mike Flynn did an op-ed for us last year against the EATS Act. John Rich, who's one half of the country music group Big and Rich, or duo rather, worked with us on this issue. There have been a lot of conservative celebrities that have worked with us on this. And we really actually have a lot of folks aligned with us on the left for once. I think what they're seeing is things through a lens of, in some instances, animal welfare, but we see it through the lens of the farmers that we're working with across the country who really want to raise food the right way. They have more animals on the land. If we put more farmers on the land, we're going to have a more successful and productive food system. And you see a lot of this with people going back local, buying at farmers markets, farm to table type restaurants and things like that, because the big boxes are really not healthy. We just saw Robert F. Kennedy be confirmed as the Health and Human Services Secretary. I don't know, they were in the vote for the Ag Secretary, Brooke Rollins, when we started, so I don't know how that's gone yet, but I imagine she probably got confirmed pretty easily. She was not controversial. And we're really hoping that these folks can change the food and farm system for the American people. For those of you who are not familiar with the Farm Bill itself, it only comes up about once every 5 years. I think this is my fourth farm bill I've worked on, so that tells me at least time in Congress and the issues that I've worked on. And the two biggest issues that we're really concerned about are the EATS Act and defeating that legislation, and then passing another piece of legislation called the Opportunities for Fairness in Farming Act. Most folks don't realize this, but there are funds that were established by Congress called commodity checkoff programs. And each farmer, every time they sell a cow, they're required to pay $1 per cow into the till to the USDA. It was deemed by the Supreme Court a federal tax, even though it's not paid into the IRS. It's 40 cents a pig for hogs. And then there's a metric weight on the gallons of milk. And if you're a dairy farmer, you're paying on the sale of the cow and on the milk. And to tell you how corrupt these checkoff programs are, is they pool all of the money together, roughly about $1 billion per year. They go into a fund. The Secretary of Agriculture designates, and another board that's under the Secretary of Agriculture designates who gets the money. And most of the time, the money ends up going to the entities that are representing the big corporations, and they illegally lobby for policies that are putting farmers out of business. One example is country of origin labeling. Today, if you go buy a steak in the store and it's on a styrofoam tray and it says product of the USA, that doesn't mean anything other than it was packaged and wrapped in saran wrap on the styrofoam tray in the USA. It could have been raised and slaughtered in Brazil, could have been raised and slaughtered in China, and shipped to you and labeled as a product of the USA. So we're working to change that. I do think that's probably on the horizon. It's really something that concerns a lot of folks, because you want to know where your food's coming from, right? You want to know the quality of the food. You want to know about antibiotics. You want to know about the dyes in the food. Most people don't realize when you buy a red steak on the tray at the store, that red meat and the actual redness is not blood. It's actually red dye because the meat turns brown so quickly. And a lot of people don't know that. So there are a lot of health and safety issues in this area, and buying local, buying from your farmers, close proximity to home, in my personal opinion, is the best way to go. I work with a guy, and I tell him he's the shining example of what a farm should be, in Bluffton, Georgia, named Will Harris. He has a farm called White Oak Pastures, and everything there is raised on site, slaughtered on site, never given antibiotics. You really have a high quality of food. He sells to Whole Foods. I buy a lot of his products myself, but not him. There's someone in every region and at least every state. I know there's 2 or 3 that I know that are really these farm to table type producers, who it might cost you a little more. It's probably always going to cost you a little more, but it's going to be a lot healthier for you. And you're going to end up paying for it one way or the other, because if you eat bad food and you eat low quality food, you're going to end up paying for it with healthcare and health costs later on in life, versus eating properly and eating healthy on the front end. And that's what we're trying to do, is educate people in Congress, educate the constituency that's out there and the American people that have been asleep at the wheel, eating so many terrible things for so long. And literally, we are being poisoned with many of the things we eat, which is why it was good to see Kennedy confirmed today. I know he was a bit controversial, but he really understands these systems, the food production systems, and what we're dealing with. And we want to maintain the state laws, because, you know, the federal government shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all operation against businesses. And every farm is a business. Margaret's right. Of our 7,000 farmers, I actually can't think of a single one that's not a Christian. There might be someone somewhere, but I can't think of anyone that I know of that isn't. And they really pride themselves in the production of food. They pride themselves in the care of their animals. They pride themselves in the way they tend to the land. And they're facing tons and tons of battles, and their profit margins are just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You see out in Texas, I'll give you an example of the Xcel Energy fires. Xcel is a big energy company that didn't take care of their power lines and power poles because they were spending too much money on DEI, And instead, they didn't tend to their business. Those power poles and power lines fell, caused the fires that we've seen in the panhandle of Texas. And that's now put a huge burden on beef producers in Texas who can't raise beef. Their land is destroyed. The grass and the forage is burned, and they're fighting these big energy companies right now for funding just to get repaid. So they're getting hit from every way you can think of it. People really don't understand what the American family farmer does and how many, or how few rather, are out there. So I know I went on a little side tangent there, but going back to the actual checkoff programs and the funds that they pay in, the previous administrations, and I'll start with Barack Obama, had a Secretary of Agriculture named Tom Vilsack, and I call him Bill Swamp or Swamp Sack. You can call him whatever you want to. But I'll be honest, I've never seen a swampier person in Washington, D.C. than Tom Vilsack, because he was the Secretary of Agriculture for 8 years under Barack Obama. He left there to go work immediately for the dairy checkoff, which is these big corporations making $1 million a year for 4 years. And then he came back as Joe Biden's Secretary of Agriculture for 4 years. The dairy checkoffs themselves didn't file their reports for the entire time that he was secretary the first go round. Fortunately, when Sonny Perdue came in and was agriculture secretary in the first Trump administration, he did make them file their reports, cleaned it up. But then I don't know how it ended up on his way out, but sometime last year, Vilsack had once again not actually required the dairy checkoffs to file their financials and reports. So farmers can't even see where their money is going and how it's being spent. And a lot of people don't really realize this. It's a complicated topic. It's not the most exciting topic in the world. It's probably the most complicated issue I've ever worked on when you really get into the nuts and bolts of things. But at the end of the day, it affects everybody because we all have to have food on the table and we all have to eat. And you can imagine where we're headed with the world today. And if we get to a scarcity paradigm where we see people like a run on the bank and It's a Wonderful Life, what about run on the grocery store and the lack of things that we saw during COVID? That can happen very easily. And we have so much consolidation. We've got to work to really help these farmers get more people back on the land and educate people about the food system. So we're continuing to work on the Farm Bill. I don't know that we will see any immediate traction on it. The Congress is trying to shuffle through some things with budget reconciliation. That's going to determine the numbers and spending on the Farm Bill. It should have been signed into law and done last year by the end of September. They filed an extension and have now extended it to September 29th or 30th of this year. I don't personally think they'll even get it done by then. I think we're probably looking more at the end of the year or even into 2026. But it's a very uncertain time for farmers without a farm bill because that's their baseline and how they market their products. And without a new farm bill, they're kind of just out there dangling in the wind. So I tell you all that just to say, appreciate your farmers, appreciate where your food comes from. Educate yourself and learn about it and see what's going on in Congress because it is something that impacts every single one of us, no matter who you are.
Thank you, Marty. Obviously, you're really, really passionate about it. So I can see there's a ton of questions there. So I'm gonna let Jason go through that. And we at CEA are working with Marty to invite our farmers into CEA so they can become part of our ecosystem. And we'll continue at CEA to represent their issues. And so that's part of our one of our big things on the legislative agenda. So thank you, Marty.
All right, so we've had quite a few questions come in. Congressman Mooney, could you share why can't Congress codify the executive orders? Are there notable obstacles that slow or prevent the process?
Oh man, thank you so much for that question. This process is so important. People want to talk about process, but process is policy. The big issue is the filibuster in the United States Senate. The House of Representatives does not have a filibuster. So as long as we can muster 218 votes, which is the majority of 435, we can pass anything. We do have a slim majority, however, so, if 3 Republicans don't want to go along and no Democrats join us, you have a problem there. And you're seeing that a little bit right now on passing our budget resolution. But historically, it's the 60-vote threshold in the U.S. Senate that makes it hard to do policy. I pointed out the Dodd-Frank repeals that we did get through, and it's not as common as it should be or used to be, but it still happens is the point. And you saw that, frankly, 2 weeks ago with the Lake and Rowley Act on immigration reform. There were 15 Democrat senators who joined every Republican to pass that bill. So it's possible to get to 60. But if it ends up being partisan, we only have 53 Republicans and there's 47 Democrats. So if it's partisan, it doesn't get to 60. And that is why it's hard to codify these laws into, codify the executive orders that Trump is doing into law. Take like a birthright citizenship or something like that. I'm not sure if the Senate could get 60 votes, because that's policy. And on policy issues, on law changes that relate to actual, policies for the country, require 60 votes. Now, the trick is, if you will, and this gets into the weeds, so I got to be real, the more I say, the more questions you ask, but on something called budget reconciliation, which is funding issues, it doesn't require the 60 votes. And you only get one bill of those a year. And we actually rolled last year's into this year. So we have two chances to pass a budget. And in the budget, you can put anything that relates to spending money, balancing the budget. So if it's fiscally related, has to come out of 3 different committees. You can do it with 50 votes plus J.D. Vance breaking the tie. You saw J.D. Vance break the tie on Pete Hegseth's confirmation for defense. So, you can actually, for 53, you can actually have, with 50 U.S. senators, and this could be bipartisan, with 50 U.S. senators, you can pass funding-related issues. So that's the tax cuts. That's how we passed tax cuts 10 years ago when Trump was in office. We passed the tax cuts, and that was it. Through the reckon, it lasts for 10 years. That has to be done again before he leaves office if we want to keep those tax cuts in office. But that can be done through the budget, so that gets around the 60 vote threshold. Now, like as a House member, I've been telling my colleagues for the last 10 years. Of course, I'm a former House member, but when I was in the House for the past 10 years, I kept telling people, guys, the House of Representatives is a co-equal branch of government. We are not lesser than the U.S. Senate, and frankly, the Congress is not lesser than the president. We're 3 branches of government. The courts, which are right now, the courts have been ruling ways that I would agree with. Congress and the president, 3 separate but equal branches of government, and we need to stick to that. I will say the U.S. Constitution is beautiful in many ways, not the least of which is its simplicity. But in the U.S. Constitution, it actually says all spending must arrive in the U.S. House of Representatives, not the U.S. Senate. The People's House, as the House of Representatives called the People's House, the founders of our country said, we're the ones who spend the money. We're the ones who authorize the spending of the money. And with that goes the taxes as well. The U.S. Senate can't even do that. So normally the House would have to go first. There was actually one year, some years ago, when Boehner was Speaker, there was a fight over the Senate over raising taxes. Boehner passed no spending bills whatsoever so that the Senate couldn't pass a tax hike. So historically, this is a power in the House of Representatives to spend your hard-earned tax dollars or not spend your hard-earned tax dollars to balance the budget, because the House of Representatives is elected every 2 years. If the people in this country have a problem, they can throw them out and change them over. That happens a lot. I wanted to point out, that for one-party control of the U.S. government, for Republican Party control, which is now, it's only happened a handful of times throughout history that you've had all 3 branches with one party, Republican Party. It's actually a rare thing. So next year, the voters have a chance to turn over the House if they want to. Every 2 years, all of us are up for election, which is why the founders of our country put the spending there. So the House has to go first. Then it has to, there's a process from the Budget Reconciliation Act of 1974 that lays out the process. If you want, after this, I'll send you this chart I did of the 10 years I was in Congress and all the continuing resolutions we did, which are a terrible way to spend your tax dollars. We have 36 trillion in debt. That has to be addressed at some point, because our children and grandchildren are being saddled with a massive debt, much of which is to China, which, as Marty mentioned, is now buying American companies that are essential to us. So these are critical issues that we have to deal with. But it all starts with knowing the process, getting the right bills out of the committee, and then pass the House floor. But you have to either do it through the budget for 50 votes, if it's budget related only. So it's limited to that. We can't do these policies budget related only. But we need to form a coalition and push for these policies, because a lot of things Trump is doing by executive order, it's very important we put that into law so the next president doesn't just wipe it out with a stroke of his pen.
Great, thank you for that. What, if anything, do you believe Congress can do to counteract judicial activism against Trump so that his agenda doesn't get bogged down by their actions?
Well, there are some things that are that Congress authorized to do. We can zero out the salaries of the offices of certain judges. I mean, we have every right to not pay their salaries. For the most part, when the left sues, they try to cherry pick the judges. Well, they'll get an initial ruling on their side, like, I don't know, Los Angeles or something like that, or San Francisco. And there's some other court systems, New York, where the judges there are not believers in the same values as the current president. So they may win locally, but they almost always lose on appeal to the circuit or Supreme Courts. So I think one of the things that the president has done very wisely in his team is move very quickly on these things, and they are going to the courts, but then they're being not upheld either by the first court or the second. So I'm very confident that there's some delays there. So we need to be realistic about some of the things he's doing might experience some delays because the courts will slow them up. And there's a huge constitutional debate going on right now whether the president can spend less, for example. A lot of these departments, like the foreign affairs, he's been zeroing out USAID and various departments saying, I'm not going to spend any money. And there's some who have the view that the president's required to spend the money. President Trump has the view that he can't, that the Constitution and the courts say he can't spend more that's been allocated, but he can spend less. In order to balance the budget, he's been spending less. So those things are going to the courts. Some of these things do have to go through the legal process. At the end of the day, the Supreme Court's going to rule. Generally, there are 5 or 6 judges on the Supreme Court who share the same values that we all do. So I'm confident for now. I mean, even when the left ran Congress, we still had a court that maintained some sanity in this country. But this is why, frankly, elections matter because you need judges who will allow the president to do what he has to do. But again, I do think, sure, by executive order, just take, for example, building the wall and even all the tariffs. Those are all considered, powers that are temporary. They have to be reauthorized every number of days. There are literally hundreds of foreign policy tariffs and troops that are located in countries that are done on a temporary / emergency basis. And every 60, 90 days or every 6 months to comply with the law, whoever the president is for the last 20 years, just every 6 months declares another emergency and does it permanently. Really not the right way to do it. We should put those things into law, but we have to go through the messy, cumbersome process of passing the law. That's really why I say we have to pass these things into law to protect our rights going forward.
When it comes to this particular grouping, the Christian Employers Alliance, I think a question that would be of interest to a lot of our participants and members would be, what do you think Congress can or should do to codify, assuring that it remains legal to be both a committed Christian and an employer at the same time?
Yeah. When I was in 5 years ago, I put a bill in to codify what had been a longstanding court ruling for religious freedom, so that and I'm not a lawyer, by the way, but I've been making laws for basically 26 years, so I picked up a lot along the way. The term that's used in all the court rulings throughout the founding of our country is a sincerely held religious belief. Anyone who has a sincerely held religious belief, every one of those words is important, by the way, sincerely held religious belief. Otherwise, you have Wiccans and witches declaring themselves, somehow protected religiously. So it has to be sincerely held religious belief. Throughout the history of our country, that's always been considered top. And even RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, it was called. That was passed in the 1990s. Chuck Schumer was the lead sponsor in the Senate. Bill Clinton signed that bill into law, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And all it said was basically codified what had been the law, the understanding, and what we'd followed by court precedents from the founding of America until the 1990s, which if you have a sincerely held religious belief, you don't have to do something. You can be an Orthodox Jew, you could be a Christian, doesn't matter. Whatever your sincerely held religious belief is, you never could be required to violate it. So this was standard policy. But under Biden 4 years ago, when Nancy Pelosi was speaker, to all of our, as Christians, all of our shock and disagreement, they started taking that out of the bills. That was standard language in all the appropriations bills. So Health and Human Services, no nurse or doctor could be forced to do a sex change operation on a minor or an abortion. Those were all protected. they started taking it out. They just started ignoring. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I would go back and meet with my constituents, and I'd say it's hard to actually tell you how bad it is right now. There are people who think that your religious values are subservient to your government, and they're going to put you in jail or take you or shut your business down. We all remember the guy in Colorado who wouldn't bake the cake for a gay marriage. You know, they want to shut your business down if you won't comply with what they think you should believe. And if it oversteps your biblical values, too bad for you. That is what they were doing. Literally, they were doing that, even though Bill Clinton and Chuck Schumer 15 years ago weren't for that. It was stunning. So this is a great question. It's very important. I mean, look, the Supreme Court at the end of the day rules things. They overturned Roe v. Wade, which had been in law for a long time, to allow states to regulate abortions. I think that was a great victory. So the courts will rule in our favor. And I don't know why some legislators, how they had that change of viewpoint from what Bill Clinton, Chuck Schumer, and every Republican used to think, to suddenly government can make you violate your religious beliefs. But there are those who believe in that. So maybe a constitutional amendment, would help. States can put it in their state legislative constitutions. That's a good idea. If you're in a certain state, put it right there in the law. Even something as simple as displaying the 10 Commandments. These things should be protected. So I don't know, maybe we could work on a state constitutional amendment process for that. I mean, the real way to do it is put it in the Constitution. Now, hey, there are some judges who don't care what the Constitution says; they'll just make it up, and that's a problem. But our best bet is to put it in the Constitution. In lieu of that, Trump's doing a lot of stuff by executive order. We should maybe go ahead and pass further bills clarifying exactly what the law is. That doesn't mean a president won't abuse his powers down the road and ignore it. But that, put in the law or in the Constitution. But that's a great question. I mean, even I had businesses coming to me a few years ago. Your businesses, I'm sure everyone on this call probably experienced, many on your call experienced this. Businesses are coming to me saying, they're telling me I have to vaccinate my employees. I have to go to my employees and have them certify to me, hundreds, if not thousands of employees, that they're vaccinated. They were putting you as basically a policeman of your employees to force vaccinations. I mean, and some people are religiously opposed to that. They don't want to put that stuff in their bodies. So, I mean, this is a really important issue. And I just honestly want to, build up the Christian Employers Association Alliance so we can get more talk with a strong voice on this. But we have to go through the process, and that, super important issue and a lot we need to do on it.
Great, thank you. Marty, I'm sure you could jump in with this next question as well as Congressman, but can you share your thoughts on the likelihood to get everyone on board with the new American Beef Labeling Act for mandatory country of origin labeling?
Well, I think that's a hugely important issue. It goes back to the repeal of country of origin labeling. And unfortunately, I worked in the House of Representatives for a member in 2014 when they voted to repeal country of origin labeling that requires where your food comes from. And all Congress heard was that there were going to be about $3 billion in fines from Canada and Mexico because of trade agreements, and they didn't hear anything else. And the congressman I worked for actually voted to repeal country of origin labeling, and that was not my recommendation. But as the congressman knows, they don't always listen to their staff. Either way. So I think it's a huge issue. I think all the folks here really have an opportunity to weigh in with your members of Congress. You can actually call, if you guys want to take a note, or we could drop it in the chat. You can call 202-224-3121. That'll get you to the Capitol switchboard. I tell people what you really should do is call 3 times, because you have 2 U.S. senators and you have a House member. So you want to call, talk to one, call, talk to the other, and then call and talk to the third one, and ask them to support that legislation and to support your food being labeled in a manner that accurately reflects where it comes from. It's absurd that we have a situation like I was talking about earlier, where a piece of meat can be slapped on a styrofoam tray with a piece of plastic, and that's qualified to be labeled product of the USA. I know that there are a lot of producers out there, specifically in the beef sector, that have real concerns about that, because it's putting our farmers out of business, because a lot of it comes from Brazil, but it's basically cheap meat at the end of the day, and a much lower grade product. And when you bring that beef into the U.S. market and dump it on the market at a cheaper price, it hurts our cattle producers in the U.S. and our cattle producers can't make it. I know the margins on beef have been very, very low over the past few years. They're doing a little better lately over the past year or so, but historically it's a very low profit margin. And I know a lot of the guys that we work with sometimes don't even break even. So it's really important not only for our, economics of the country, the beef market, the cattle market, and for farmers, but also for the quality of food that you eat. So please do that. Again, the number's 202-224-3121 and ask your members of Congress to support that legislation.
Hey, Jason, let me jump in on that at the end here. It's so important what Marty said about your member. I used to get calls from New York City wanting me to ban coal in West, and I'm like, I'm in West Virginia. I don't care what a New York City person, want me to ban coal, the number one economic driver in my state. But call your member and then think outside the box a bit. Maybe you live in Minnesota, but you have a son or daughter that lives in Texas, and that member is a swing vote. Well, call your son or daughter and say, hey, will you call your congressman there and ask them to vote for this legislation, or make sure they're doing this. And you have vendors, suppliers, people you're in business with. You have more context than you realize. Oftentimes will be a committee vote, like Ways and Means right now is doing tax policy. It might be someone on a certain committee, and the Christian Employers Alliance will help identify the members of the committee that are most important at this crucial time, work with Christian Employers Alliance, and then see if you know somebody in that state or that district. That has a huge impact. That's the way to affect it.
No, it's really, really good points, Congressman Mooney. And, just for the CEA members on the call today, this is why we've engaged with Marty's lobbying firm to help us, come up with a really solid legislative agenda at the Hill level as well as in the state level, so we can take Congressman Mooney's advice and get some of this stuff codified and follow the proper process, right? And so that's why we're really excited to have you both on the call today and introduce you to the members because utilizing Marty's talents on the Hill and helping us get this all coordinated is going to be a win-win for all of us. And so I encourage the members. We've got emails that'll be going out, and we are forming a government relations committee and we're asking our members that have government relations folks to be part of a monthly meeting with us and to review the legislative agenda and really work with us on the Hill and when we hit the states this year. So you've given us great advice, and so we're going to follow it, Congressman. So thank you for that. Jason, I hope I can cut out somebody's question. I just wanted to put a plug in there for that because we have a plan to follow Congressman's advice, and we're putting it together right now.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and the number is in the chat if you want that number. All right, what's the holdup on the tax bill in the Republican Party? Why can't they get on the same page?
So, I did my first years in Congress. I was actually on the Budget Committee, which was a fascinating, wonderful learning experience from the inside. The holdup, I believe, is more on the spending side, not the tax side. I don't think there are many objections to extending the tax cuts and reforming the tax code, reducing taxes. I don't see that being the objection. There's something called the CBO, Congressional Budget Office. That's the one we all look to project how much a tax cut would cost and how much spending bills cost. So we do have an ongoing over $1 trillion a year deficit. I referenced earlier, those are two sides of the same coin, spending and taxation, and then your budget and your deficit. We have a debt of $36 trillion and an ongoing deficit of $1 trillion a year. Under Biden, it skyrocketed. Under Obama, it skyrocketed. But frankly, even under Republican presidents, it's gone up. So there are some who are doing what they said they would do. Back to that point, including me when I was there, we simply want to balance the budget of this country. We want to really balance the budget of this country. For the next several years, we don't spend more than we bring in, so we can start to pay off this massive debt. The interest on the debt alone is about as much as we spend on the U.S. military. It's our largest expense. So it's completely out of control. And both parties need to do better with this. So that's the holdup. The holdup is how much do we cut in the upcoming tax budget bill, because they're combined, taxes and spending together. How much can we cut from existing programs? Trump's doing a great job. He's cutting like crazy, wasteful spending that he's found. Doge is there with Elon Musk. Much needed. That Doge is much needed. But there's still a lot more that can be done to make sure we live within our constitutional restrictions and don't waste your money and just spend the money on the most important things to balance the budget. That's the holdup. There are some Republicans, like my friends in the Freedom Caucus, who want to really seriously balance that budget soon, which requires more cuts to the government spending. There are other Republican members of Congress. I talked to one just last week, a good friend of mine, I won't say the name, and they were critical of the cuts. They said it's cutting too much and too fast. So the holdup is over the cuts, and they can work out the differences on the tax policies. Everyone wants to reduce it. When I was there before, when we passed it, the goal was actually to get the corporate tax rate down to 15%, from the 35% it was at 10 years ago. You may recall what a huge tax rate that was. 35%. Businesses were leaving America for other countries just to survive because their competitors would leave, and it was a 20% tax off the bottom tax differential. If you were in, say, Ireland or Switzerland or even some of these countries, Canada, you had a better tax rate. So it was easy to flee America. So to stop that, both parties actually agreed on this. I think Obama wanted to cut it to 25. We wanted to cut it to 15. We wound up at 21 is where, when the negotiations went back and forth, we wound up at 21 corporate tax rate. I think I saw Trump say he does want to push it down to 15% on the corporate tax rate. But then there's the projections of how much that'll cost. And there are those of us who are conservative, like Ronald Reagan, believe that that'll boost the economy. So if you cut taxes, you actually bring in more money in the short and long term, especially the long term. So we want that factored in. So there's debate over how much really a tax cut may cost or actually bring in. These are the things they're fighting about and always have. And I'm still confident because it doesn't require 60 votes in the U.S. Senate, despite the very slim majority we have in the House. We have the strongest leader that this country's ever had right now in Trump, and he's been very active. Not all presidents, by the way, engage with legislators. I heard when I was first elected in 2014, believe it or not, Barack Obama was still president. That sounds like history today to talk about Mr. Obama, President Obama. But the Democrats would complain that President Obama never interacted with the House. He didn't come to Congress to meet with them. He didn't have meetings at the White House. He was not very hands-on in the legislative process. He did his thing, let Congress do their thing. That is not Donald Trump. Donald Trump, when you read this stuff about he's visiting with House members, senators, this guy's all over it, man. He really is. And he wants to be successful, and he expects people to help him. And most people are doing it. So I'm optimistic about the ability to get the tax cuts passed, but we got to keep our finger on the pulse. And the CEA can help with that because within the tax cuts, there are certain priorities that may make it to the top and may fall off. So and some will fall off in order to make this all match as far as the spending number goes. So we need to stay in touch with our legislators on that.
And then staying on the topic of the spending bill, why won't Congress pass a bill to require a budget every year instead of just proposing a budget resolution as well? And then the second part of that question is, do you believe we'll return to a single subject spending bill, and when, if we will?
Yeah, oh my, God bless you whoever asked that question, because this is something that's been my meaning of existence for 10 years. I just was telling all my colleagues, we got to get back to single subject spending bills, guard the power of the purse that lies in the House of Representatives. We got to stop surrendering that to continuing resolutions that are bankrupting our country, giving up policy. It's terrible what was happening. We have a relief with Trump, but that'll last 4 years, maybe more, God willing. But to get back to it, I mean, the process, actually, we don't have to, it's getting back to it. We don't have to reinvent anything. This thing called the Budget Reconciliation Act of 1974, that is the existing way that we're supposed to spend your tax dollars. And that does call for 12 single subject spending bills. Those are called the appropriations bills. That's the way you're supposed to do it. We just stopped doing it. We've been doing continuing resolutions, which in my view is a complete surrender. I learned my first year in office that we were doing terrible with those, so I stopped voting for them. But we need to not fall back to these continuing resolutions and surrender the single subject spending bills. It's a discipline issue within Congress. Actually, can you reread the question? What was the first part of that? First part of that question. The single subject, the second part, but a balanced budget every year. Okay, yeah. Balanced budget every year. That was it. So that's part of the game. Again, I was on the budget committee my first 2 years, and they're voting a budget today, supposedly. And the way that historically a liberal would balance the budget is it'd be a 10-year balanced budget plan. So in the 10th year, our budget would be balanced. Not next year, but in 10 years. That's the way historically they do. They budget on a 10-year window. I know we're short on time, so I'll try to be quick. But guess what? The first 5 years, spending goes up. In the last 5 years, spending starts to go down. Then it balances in the 10th year. The problem is they pass in the budget next year with another 10-year spending window, and it goes up for 5 years. It never actually goes down. So part of the fight you're seeing right now is you want to balance it over 10 years, but it has to be 1/10 every year, not going up for several years and then theoretically, hopefully go down the following years. That's a huge battle. We do pass the budget every year. We should just follow it, stick with it, and we can do it. It's possible to do it.
Thank you, Congressman. I know we're out of time, and I definitely want to be respectful of yours and Marty time. I know you guys are on the Hill and very busy today. And so we thank you. And I would just, sorry we couldn't get to all the questions today, but, feel free, the members, just go ahead and send me or Jason an email. We can get your questions answered, and we can follow back up with you. And it's our intention to hold one of these every quarter for our members as we go through this fascinating time and keep everybody updated every quarter on what we're doing on the Hill. So engage with us. Feel free to reach out to Jason and I, and join our government relations committee if this is of interest of you, to be able to work with Marty and Congressman Mooney as we hit the Hill and try to fix some of this. So I appreciate you both. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you all for having us. We enjoyed it.
Thank you. God
Thank
bless.
you.
God bless.
Have a great day.
You will.